911, what's your emergency?
I'm dying.
Stay with me, sir. Can you tell me where you are?
One Raven Terrace. Someone's strangling me with his bare hands.
Please stay calm. Can you describe the attacker?
So quiet. I can't see him. It's like he's invisible, but the grip is real.
Invisible? All right, stay on the line. Help is coming. Can you try to get to safety?
I'll try. But hurry!
Keep talking to me. You're doing great. We're getting closer.
June 8th, 1998. I didn't see it. I couldn't. Or maybe I just refused to see it. Refused to see how someone could be talking through a 911 call while their throat was being squeezed by an attacker. The impracticality of it all. It only made me worry about the actual situation once we arrived. A hanging attempt in progress? Yet he claimed he was being attacked. Doubtful. Attackers rarely offer a phone call before finishing the job. Of all the unfortunate days, this was one of them, since I had Richard as my partner. Richard Clark always had bad blood with him on duty, due to his self-centered world, although he had raised a valid point in the wrong manner at times, just like the one he dropped right now. Through the ambulance's windshield, a lone officer's frantic hand gestures cut through the late afternoon sunlight. A cluster of local residents huddled together, their faces etched with concern, while several police cars formed a perimeter around a single house. A yellow police line "Do Not Cross" tape snaked around the property. Stepping off the ambulance, I caught the eye of a harried-looking officer. "What's going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice calm despite the rising unease in my gut. He wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "No obvious sign of forced entry from the outside. House seems pristine. We're going to force the door open in a few moments." Richard shot me a grin, his self-assuredness rankling in the already tense atmosphere. "Told ya," he muttered, as if confirming his earlier theory about a hanging attempt was somehow a victory. It left a bitter taste in my mouth. The last thing I needed right now was his morbid satisfaction. "Police, coming in." The announcement echoed from the front of the house, followed by a few seconds of silence. Then a loud bang reverberated through the air. 3 officers swiftly approached the door, and within moments they'd forced it open. They ushered the entire dispatch unit inside, but Richard and I were stopped in our tracks. "Hold on there," a gruff voice instructed. "Protocol dictates you stay outside until the scene is secure. Wouldn't want you caught in a crossfire." Frustration gnawed at me. Every second wasted meant a potential decline in the patient's condition, if he was still alive, that is. We had just finished a final equipment check, the familiar weight of the trauma bag and oxygen tank reassuring, when the officers intervened. Now forced to wait outside, we could only listen and hope for the best. It was Raven Terrace, again. Rows of identical, affluent houses, guarded by identical gates. This one, however, stood proudly on the corner, exposed to the supermarket across the street. The increased visibility, it seemed, had also attracted an unwanted crowd. Every case I had handled on this street had left its mark, and this one already felt heavy. 15 minutes after the initial breach, we were given the green light. Richard and I exchanged a quick nod, the familiar weight of our trauma bags a comforting presence. Stepping over the threshold, the first thing that struck me was the absence of chaos. The worn wooden floors, though undeniably aged, didn't creak underfoot, and the collection of small, circular picture frames seemed stubbornly straight on the wall. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the corridor that felt distinctly ordinary. In this environment, we, the medics and the officers, stood out as the true intruders here. Stepping into the living room, the initial sense of normalcy shattered. Cops swarmed the space, securing the scene with markers and notes. A chaotic tableau unfolded. A broken bookshelf teetering precariously, books scattered like fallen dominoes. A bowl lay shattered on the floor, spilling popcorn across the rug. A smashed TV dominated the scene, its screen shattered and partially adhered to a fallen metal rod, the likely weapon used. Amidst the chaos, the potential victim lay sprawled on the floor. Thankfully, he was alive. A police officer, after checking him, gestured for us to tend to him. Richard muttered, "No hanging marks," with a hint of disappointment in his voice. I refrained from commenting on his morbid hope. Kneeling beside the man, who appeared to be in his late 30s, I took in the signs of violence. Welts and swelling marred his neck. The whites of his eyes were bloodshot, and his pupils were unequal in size. His lips and nail beds displayed a concerning bluish tinge, all indicating a struggle and potential lack of oxygen. His rapid pulse confirmed this, further supported by the telltale neck swelling, a clear sign of strangulation. And then, to add to the distress, there was another surprise. A sizable puddle of vomit. Decapitated bodies, bulging intestines. No problem. But vomit. Never could get used to it. While I worked to stabilize the patient, the police officer stuck around like a hawk, seemingly waiting for something. As the man's breathing eased slightly, he began to speak in a hoarse, squeaky voice, punctuated by occasional coughs. "Smashed TV with rod." He coughed, then pointed to his neck. "He came for my..." The policeman cut him short, declaring, "The victim is narrating a potential account." I protested that the man needed immediate medical attention, but all I got was a cold, "Protocols." He continued, "The quicker we get information, the faster we catch the assailant." As we stood there, frustration gnawed at me while the officer continued his interrogation. Surveying the secured scene, the markings and notes stirred a hint of morbid curiosity within me. The prospect of searching for clues that could result in an arrest, rather than another hospitalization, held a twisted appeal. Lost in thought, I imagined myself as the modern-day Columbo, Frank Columbo, my childhood hero. However, as my father had predicted early on, catching criminals was not my calling. When I was back on solid ground, another officer caught my eye, his face etched with bewilderment. He mentioned the trashed living room contrasted with the rest of the house, pristine, untouched, not even a damaged window or a sign of forced entry. It lacked any exit point aside from the front door, and the house itself didn't even have a chimney. The stark contrast silenced the morbid detective in me, telling me that even though the entire clues thing looked appealing, it wasn't for someone like me. "All right, you can take him. We're done here." The officer's tone lacked urgency, bordering on dismissive. I requested Richard fetch the stretcher, surprised by his immediate compliance. While waiting for his return, I asked about the officer's findings. He reported with a flat expression, saying that the victim claimed to have been strangled by an intruder he didn't see. He further explained the absence of any physical evidence, such as clothing or identification, and finished with a sardonic chuckle. "We can't exactly investigate supernatural occurrences, now can we?" I exhaled a sigh, frustration evident. Just then, Richard appeared with the stretcher. We efficiently transferred the stabilized patient onto it, his condition allowing for safe transport. As we loaded him into the ambulance, the weight of the onlooker's stare settled on me, a mix of curiosity and judgment. A different officer approached, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, curiosity battling with concern. He gestured towards a woman in the crowd. Seems this individual wasn't exactly well liked, he remarked with a neutral tone, pointing to a woman in the crowd. That woman claims he slapped her at the supermarket checkout a few days ago while buying popcorn. Said she wasn't surprised someone got to him. I brushed off the officer's comment. Why on earth did he feel the need to share that information with me? My job was to treat everyone in need, regardless of their supposed reputation. With that in mind, I headed towards the ambulance. Richard, already behind the wheel, motioned for me to take the back. My initial plan to handle the patient alone was disrupted. Teamwork, he said, a touch of defiance in his voice. I did what you asked earlier. Now it's your turn. Recognizing the futility of arguing in the short time frame, I settled into the back with the patient as we set off for the hospital. As the ambulance hummed along, the victim lay sound asleep on the stretcher. I had secured him comfortably, leaving ample space for easy breathing. Despite the chaos of the past hour, he appeared remarkably relaxed, even snoring softly in his slumber. A testament, no doubt, partly to the tranquilizers administered to him. My mind raced, reviewing the scene. The victim's injuries were consistent with strangulation, the ransacked living room hinting at a struggle. Yet the pristine condition of the rest of the house baffled me. How did the attacker enter and leave without a trace? I dismissed any notions of supernatural powers. There had to be a rational explanation. It seemed that only time held the answers. The jolt that threw me against the ambulance seat jolted me awake as well. My heart hammered, dispelling the remnants of a dream about supernatural powers. Ridiculous. Checking the still snoring patient, I exited the back and found Richard already inspecting the front driver's side tire. Flat, he announced, his usual cynical smirk replaced by a frown. Great timing, right? Ambulances don't carry spares. So here we were, stuck with a patient and a useless tire on a deserted stretch of road. Richard, ever the improviser, gestured for me to return to the back and monitor the patient while he called for a tow truck. Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We have a flat tire, requesting immediate assistance. Patient has... He paused, his brow furrowing. Mark, what's the patient's status? Mark? He called out, his voice a mix of concern and frustration. Then the scene that would ever be etched in our memories unfolded. Holy shit! Richard exclaimed, his eyes wide with disbelief. I was pinned to the floor of the ambulance, a hand reaching down from above, fingers stiff and unrelenting, pressing against my neck. It was the patient, his eyes still closed and continuing to snore happily. Yet, somehow he had freed himself from his restraints and was attempting to strangle me. Panic surged through me as I struggled against his surprisingly strong grip, a hold that any professional WWF fighter would envy. Just as I began to lose hope, Richard intervened, pushing the patient away with enough force to break his hold. The patient, now fully awake, disoriented and confused, stammered. You hit me, while gesturing accusingly at Richard. You almost choked him to death, Joker. Richard countered, panting. Consider yourself lucky I'm not pressing charges. The adrenaline subsided, leaving me slightly breathless. Tightening the straps around the now awake patient, I hoped to keep him alert. His earlier attempt to strangle me, seemingly while asleep, had been terrifying. His right hand, I was convinced, held the key to this bizarre incident. And my hunch turned out to be correct. A few days later, back in the ER, I inquired about the patient from the nurse. She informed me that a neurologist had overseen multiple examinations and ultimately diagnosed him with AHS, better known as alien hand syndrome. This rare neurological disorder manifests as involuntary movements in one hand, often accompanied by a sense of detachment or loss of control. The affected hand can perform actions and movements entirely outside the patient's conscious intention, causing the unsettling feeling of it having a mind of its own. Let me tell you, I was absolutely floored. Even as a seasoned paramedic who has seen it all, this was a total curveball for me. Wrap your head around it. I couldn't. But I'm here to tell you, it's as real as it gets. The man who had reported the attack was correct. He had indeed been attacked. But the assailant was not an intruder. It was his own hand. In the hospital, I stole a glance through the window into his room. There he was, peacefully snoring once more. And believe it or not, his hand flipped me the bird. No, just kidding. That last part never happened.